Welcome back, everyone. Today's story is one of secrets, betrayal, and resilience. But before we dive into it, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you tuning in during a cozy morning or a late-night scroll? We'd love to hear from you. Now let's get started. The small suburban town of Brentwood seemed like the perfect place to settle down. It was 2015, and the community thrived on its reputation of close-knit families, clean streets, and neatly trimmed hedges. For Sarah Jenkins, this little slice of suburban heaven was supposed to be the backdrop for her happily ever after. Sarah was in her late 30s, a dedicated schoolteacher known for her creative lessons and nurturing personality. She had a way of making every child in her class feel like they were the most important person in the world. Her husband, Mark, was a local contractor and handyman, a classic guy's guy, with an easygoing charm and a reputation for his skillful work. Together, they were the couple everyone admired at neighborhood barbecues and PTA meetings. They seemed perfect, too perfect, maybe. The couple shared a quaint home they'd bought after their wedding, complete with a white picket fence and a lush garden Sarah had lovingly tended over the years. Inside, the walls were lined with family photos, each picture telling a story of love, laughter, and the life they'd built together. Their golden retriever, Max, was the final piece of the puzzle, a loyal companion who followed Sarah everywhere. But behind the smiles and idyllic scenes of their life lay an undercurrent of tension. It wasn't obvious, at least not to outsiders, but Sarah had started to notice changes in Mark. His late-night work emergencies were becoming more frequent, and his once attentive demeanor had turned distant. He'd always been a hard worker, but now it seemed like work was more of an escape. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah decided to surprise Mark at his job site. She'd baked a batch of his favorite chocolate chip cookies and thought it would be a sweet way to reconnect. When she arrived, however, she was met with an unexpected sight. Mark was standing with another woman, a striking brunette named Lauren. Sarah recognized her as a client of Mark's from one of his recent renovation projects. The two were standing close, laughing about something Sarah couldn't hear. Mark's hand lingered on Lauren's shoulder just a little too long, and Sarah felt a pang of something she hadn't experienced in years' doubt. Mark noticed Sarah and waved her over, his expression shifting from carefree to slightly nervous. "Hey, babe, what are you doing here?" "Thought I'd bring you a little treat," Sarah replied, holding up the container of cookies. Her smile felt forced as she turned to Lauren. "Hi, I'm Sarah, Mark's wife." Lauren extended her hand with a practiced ease, her smile wide and warm. "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Mark's been a lifesaver on this project. I don't know what I'd do without him." Sarah's instincts were telling her something wasn't right, but she pushed the thought aside. After all, Mark had never given her a real reason to doubt him before. Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried to ignore the growing unease in her chest, but little things kept piling up. Mark was spending more time working late, and his phone seemed glued to his hand. When Sarah casually asked who he was texting one evening, his response was clipped. "Just a client. Nothing important." One night, as Sarah was preparing for bed, she noticed Mark's phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification from Lauren. It was a simple message: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, winking face." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a way she couldn't ignore. Still, she chose not to confront him right away. She needed more information, something concrete. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Sarah decided to do some quiet investigating. One Saturday, while Mark was out running errands, she accessed his work laptop, something she'd never thought twice about before. Her hands trembled as she opened his email. What she found was subtle but undeniable. There were messages from Lauren, dozens of them. Most were related to the renovation project, but a few veered into more personal territory. "I had such a great time at lunch today," one email read. "We should do it again soon." A pit formed in Sarah's stomach as she scrolled further. While there was no outright evidence of an affair, the tone of their exchanges was far too familiar for her liking. And then there was the receipt. An expensive dinner at a restaurant Sarah had always wanted to try, but that Mark had dismissed as too fancy. Sarah couldn't bring herself to confront Mark just yet. Instead, she confided in her best friend, Emily, during their weekly coffee date. Emily had been Sarah's rock through every major life event, and she listened intently as Sarah poured out her suspicions. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Emily shook her head. "No, Sarah. Your gut is telling you something for a reason. If you think something's off, it probably is. But you need to be sure before you do anything drastic." Emily's words gave Sarah the clarity she needed. She decided to hire a private investigator, someone who could confirm or deny her suspicions without tipping off Mark. As the investigation began, Sarah did her best to act normal around Mark, though it was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She kept up her routine, smiling at him over breakfast and asking about his day, all while her mind raced with questions. Was she wrong? Was she about to blow up her marriage over a misunderstanding? When the private investigator finally called her with the results, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Mark had been meeting Lauren regularly, far more often than necessary for work. They'd been spotted at intimate dinners, and there were photos of them laughing and holding hands outside Lauren's apartment. The betrayal hit Sarah like a freight train. She'd always believed in the strength of their bond, the foundation of trust they'd built over the years. But now, that foundation felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Sarah is at a crossroads, armed with devastating knowledge about her husband's actions. What will she do next? Stay tuned for the next part of the story to find out how Sarah begins to unravel the layers of betrayal and decides on her next move. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more captivating tales like this one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Previously, we left off with Sarah discovering the heartbreaking truth about Mark's secret meetings with Lauren. Armed with undeniable proof, Sarah is faced with a tough decision. Does she confront him, or does she dig deeper to uncover the full extent of his betrayal? Before we continue, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this one. Your support helps us bring these tales to life. Sarah sat alone in the dimly lit living room that night, Max curled up at her feet as if sensing her unease. The investigator's report was still fresh in her mind, the images of Mark and Lauren laughing together replaying over and over like a cruel slideshow. Her instincts had been right all along, but the confirmation didn't bring relief, only more questions. Why? That single word consumed her thoughts. Why would Mark betray her? Was something missing in their marriage that she'd overlooked? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do now? The next morning, Sarah tried to carry on as usual. She prepared breakfast, greeted Mark with a casual good morning, and went about her day at school. But inside, a storm was brewing. She couldn't stop replaying the investigator's findings and the cold, hard evidence of Mark's deceit. Emily checked in on her during lunch, her voice laced with concern. "Have you talked to him yet?" she asked. "No," Sarah admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I need to understand why he did it before I confront him. I don't want to explode without knowing the whole story." Emily nodded. "Just don't wait too long. The longer you keep this to yourself, the harder it'll be to move forward." Sarah decided to keep watching and waiting, hoping to learn more about Mark's true intentions. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just an affair. Over the next week, she began noticing subtle changes in his behavior. He seemed more attentive than usual, offering to do the dishes, complimenting her cooking, and even suggesting a date night. At first, she wondered if he suspected she knew something. But the more she observed him, the more it felt like guilt. Mark's actions didn't feel like love. They felt like overcompensation. During their date night, they went to a cozy Italian restaurant they used to frequent when they first got married. For a brief moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could go back to the way they were. Maybe this was just a rough patch. But then Mark's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it quickly, his expression tightening before he flipped it over. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but tinged with suspicion. "Just work," he replied too quickly, forcing a smile. "Nothing important." That was the final straw for Sarah. She realized Mark wasn't going to come clean on his own. If she wanted answers, she'd have to confront him, and she'd need to be prepared. The following weekend, Sarah asked Mark to sit down with her in the living room. The air was thick with tension as she held the investigator's report in her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but firm, "is there something you need to tell me?" He frowned, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, holding up the folder, "I know about Lauren." The color drained from his face as he stared at the evidence in her hands. "Sarah, don't lie to me." She cut him off, her voice breaking. "I've seen the emails. I've seen the pictures. I know everything, Mark." For a moment he said nothing. Then he sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think." "Don't insult my intelligence," Sarah snapped. "You've been sneaking around behind my back for months. If it's not what I think, then explain it to me." Mark hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Lauren and we got close during the renovation project. She was going through a tough time, and I guess I let it get too personal. But I swear, it didn't go any further than that." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that? After all the late nights, the secret dinners, and the texts? Mark, you didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it." "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I never stopped loving you." Sarah's heart ached at his words, but she couldn't ignore the betrayal. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me. Do you have any idea what this has done to me?" For the next hour, they went back and forth, Sarah demanding answers and Mark scrambling to explain himself. He insisted that the affair was purely emotional, that he never intended to hurt her. But the damage was done. By the end of the conversation, Sarah felt drained. She couldn't decide what hurt more, Mark's betrayal or the realization that their once solid marriage might be beyond repair. "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mark." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just tell me what you need." Sarah didn't respond. She got up and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting alone on the couch. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from the pain. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the questions swirling in her mind. Could she ever trust Mark again? Did she even want to? Emily suggested couples therapy, but Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to face their issues head-on. For now, she needed space to process everything. In the meantime, Mark continued his attempts to make amends. He left her handwritten notes apologizing for his actions, made dinner every night, and even started seeing a therapist on his own. But no matter what he did, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their marriage would never be the same. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Sarah is at a crossroads, torn between trying to rebuild her marriage and walking away from the man who betrayed her trust. What will she decide? Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where we'll explore the next chapter in Sarah's journey and the tough choices she'll have to make. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Mark deserves a second chance? Or is it time for Sarah to move on? The weeks that followed Sarah and Mark's confrontation were anything but peaceful. Despite Mark's repeated attempts to patch things up, Sarah felt the chasm between them growing wider. Every time she looked at him, she couldn't help but see Lauren's face, hear their laughter, and picture the secret world they had shared. Sarah knew she had to make a decision, but before she could, something unexpected happened. Lauren called. It was a Thursday evening when Sarah's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, she'd ignore it, but something compelled her to answer. The voice on the other end was soft but unmistakable. "Sarah, it's Lauren. We need to talk." The audacity left Sarah speechless for a moment. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Lauren?" There was a long pause before Lauren replied. "Please just hear me out. I never wanted to hurt you, But there's more going on than you realize. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet. Curiosity outweighed her anger, and deep down, she hoped for some clarity. An explanation that might make sense of the chaos. The next day, Sarah met Lauren at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Lauren looked tired, her usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "I know you have no reason to believe me," Lauren began, her voice trembling. "But this isn't what you think it is." Sarah crossed her arms, her tone cold. "You're going to have to be more specific." Lauren hesitated before leaning in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mark and I, yes, we got close, but it wasn't about an affair. It was about the money." That caught Sarah off guard. "What money?" Lauren took a deep breath. "Mark approached me months ago about a deal. He said he needed my help to invest in some project. He promised me a cut of the profits if I helped him secure a loan using my company's name." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Why would he need your help? We're not struggling financially." "That's what I thought," Lauren admitted. "But he was desperate. He said it had to stay a secret. At first, I thought it was just a business deal, but things got complicated. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they formed a picture Sarah wasn't ready to see." "Complicated how?" Lauren finally met Sarah's eyes. "He made it personal. He used our connection to manipulate me. And when I started asking questions, he shut me out." Sarah left the cafe with more questions than answers. If Lauren was telling the truth, Mark's betrayal went deeper than she had imagined. It wasn't just about an emotional affair. It was about deception, manipulation, and financial secrecy. That night, Sarah confronted Mark again. This time, she wasn't holding back. "Why didn't you tell me about the loan?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. Mark's face went pale. "Who told you about that?" "Lauren," Sarah replied, crossing her arms. "She told me everything." Mark sat down heavily on the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't want to involve you. It was supposed to be a quick deal. Something to help us get ahead." "Get ahead of what?" Sarah shot back. "We're not in financial trouble, Mark. Or were you just too afraid to tell me the truth?" "I was trying to fix things," he admitted, his voice muffled. "The business hasn't been doing as well as I let on. I thought if I could land this one deal, everything would be fine." Sarah's anger boiled over. "So you lied to me? You lied to her? And for what? A gamble?" The confrontation left Sarah reeling. She couldn't believe how much Mark had hidden from her. The man she thought she knew had become a stranger, and she wasn't sure if their marriage could survive the damage. But as the days passed, Sarah realized she wasn't just angry. She was determined. If Mark thought he could lie his way out of this, he was wrong. She began digging deeper, combing through their financial records, looking for anything that didn't add up. What she found was worse than she expected. Mark had been taking out loans for months, funneling money into a series of high-risk investments. Some had paid off, but others had left them dangerously close to financial ruin. He had used their house as collateral without her knowledge and had even dipped into their savings account. When Sarah confronted him with the evidence, Mark didn't deny it. Instead, he broke down, begging for her forgiveness. "I was scared, Sarah," he confessed. "I thought I could fix everything before you found out. I didn't want to lose you." Sarah's voice was cold. "You didn't want to lose me, so you lied to me? You put our home, our future, at risk without even asking me." "I didn't know what else to do," Mark said, tears streaming down his face. "I was drowning." For the first time, Sarah saw the depth of Mark's desperation. But instead of feeling sympathy, she felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had made decision after decision without her, prioritizing his pride over their partnership. As the tension between them reached its breaking point, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to let Mark drag her down with him. She contacted a lawyer, seeking advice on how to protect herself financially. The lawyer's advice was clear. Sarah needed to separate her finances from Mark's as soon as possible. If his investments continued to fail, she could be held responsible for the debts. It was a harsh reality, but Sarah knew it was necessary. For the first time in years, she put herself first. Meanwhile, Mark's attempts to repair their relationship became increasingly desperate. He started attending therapy sessions, both alone and with Sarah, hoping to rebuild her trust. But every step forward was met with the weight of his past mistakes. Lauren, too, tried to make amends. She sent Sarah a letter apologizing for her role in the betrayal, explaining that she had been manipulated just as much as Sarah had. But Sarah wasn't ready to forgive either of them. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The life she had built with Mark was crumbling, and she was faced with a choice: fight to rebuild their marriage or walk away and start fresh. The decision wasn't easy, but Sarah knew one thing for certain: she would never let herself be deceived again. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Sarah is standing at the edge of a turning point, her future uncertain, but her resolve stronger than ever. What will she choose? Stay tuned for the next part of this gripping story as we uncover the fallout from Mark's betrayal and the surprising twists that lie ahead. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? The tension between Sarah and Mark was suffocating. Their once comfortable home now felt like a battlefield, with unspoken words hanging in the air like storm clouds. Despite Mark's apologies and his newfound commitment to therapy, Sarah remained guarded. She had heard his promises before, and this time, she wasn't so quick to believe. Then, one evening, something happened that shattered the fragile truce they had managed to build. Started with a phone call. Mark was in the shower when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Sarah glanced at it instinctively, her heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen: Lauren. Her first thought was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of her. She picked up the phone and answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. There was a pause on the other end before Lauren's voice came through, hesitant and nervous. "Mark, I need to talk to you. It's important." "This is Sarah," she replied coldly. "What do you want?" Lauren stammered, clearly caught off guard. I didn't mean to call you. I need to speak to Mark." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Why? What could you possibly have to say to him that you can't tell me?" Lauren hesitated again, but then she sighed, as if resigning herself to the truth. "It's about the deal. There's more you need to know." When Mark came out of the shower, Sarah was waiting for him, holding his phone like it was evidence in a courtroom. "Lauren called," she said, her voice sharp. "She says there's more I need to know about your little deal. Care to explain?" Mark froze, the color draining from his face. "What did she say?" "She didn't have to say much," Sarah shot back. "It's obvious you're still hiding something. What is it, Mark? What haven't you told me?" Mark sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his damp hair. "I didn't want to tell you because I thought I could fix it on my own." "Fix what?" Sarah demanded, her patience wearing thin. "What have you done now?" Mark took a deep breath before finally confessing. "The deal. It fell apart. The money I borrowed. It's gone." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean, gone?" "The investments I made," Mark explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't pan out. The market shifted and I lost everything. And now the lenders are coming after me." Sarah felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. "You're telling me we're in debt? How much?" Mark couldn't meet her eyes. "A lot. More than we can pay." The revelation hit Sarah like a freight train. Not only had Mark lied to her, but his reckless decisions had put their entire future at risk. The home they had built together, the savings they had worked so hard for, it was all on the line. But as the initial shock wore off, something inside Sarah snapped. She realized she couldn't keep living like this, constantly cleaning up Mark's messes. If he was going to drag her down, she'd fight back with everything she had. The next day, Sarah met with her lawyer again, this time armed with the full story. She laid out the details of Mark's financial mismanagement, the secret loans, and the mounting debts. The lawyer's advice was clear. Sarah needed to protect herself and her assets before it was too late. We'll start by separating your accounts, the lawyer said, making notes on a legal pad. And I'd recommend filing for a legal separation. It's the best way to ensure you're not held responsible for Mark's debts. Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. Do whatever you need to do. I'm not going down with him. Meanwhile, Mark's desperation reached new heights. He started making frantic calls to old business contacts, hoping to find someone who could bail him out. But his reputation had taken a hit, and no one was willing to take the risk. One evening, Sarah found him sitting in the darkened living room, a bottle of whiskey on the coffee table and his head in his hands. "Mark," she said, her voice firm, "you need to stop this. Drinking isn't going to fix anything." He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot. "I don't know what else to do, Sarah. I've lost everything. And now I'm losing you, too." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression steely. "You lost me the moment you decided to lie to me, and now you're going to have to face the consequences." As the weeks passed, the tension between them escalated. Sarah moved into the guest bedroom, further cementing the growing divide in their marriage. Mark continued to spiral, his desperation turning into bitterness. He blamed Sarah for not supporting him, for giving up on their relationship when things got tough. But Sarah refused to back down. She knew she deserved better than a partner who lied, cheated, and dragged her down. And she was determined to reclaim her life, no matter what it took. Then came the final blow. Sarah received a letter in the mail, a foreclosure notice for their home. The lender had decided to call in the loan, and with no way to pay, they were at risk of losing everything. Sarah confronted Mark once again, holding the letter in her trembling hands. "This is it, Mark," she said, her voice breaking. "This is what your lies have done. We're losing our home." Mark looked at the letter, his face pale and drawn. "I'll fix it," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll find a way." But Sarah didn't believe him anymore. She had heard those words too many times before, and they no longer held any weight. As the foreclosure deadline loomed, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She contacted a financial advisor and began exploring her options. She sold her car, liquidated some of her savings, and even considered moving in with her sister to start over. And through it all, she kept her head held high. She refused to let Mark's mistakes define her future. The story was building toward its climax, the tension reaching a boiling point. Sarah was on the brink of losing everything, but she wasn't going down without a fight. And as the final confrontation with Mark loomed, she knew one thing for certain. She would come out of this stronger than ever. And that's where we'll leave it for now. The stakes are higher than ever, and the next chapter promises to be the most intense yet. Will Sarah find a way to save herself from Mark's mistakes? Or will she lose everything in the process? Stay tuned for the next part of this gripping story as we uncover the shocking twists and turns that lie ahead. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Let us know in the comments. What would you do if you were in Sarah's position? The walls seemed to be closing in on Mark. Every effort to salvage his situation ended in failure, and his once confident demeanor had been replaced with a mixture of panic and defeat. Sarah, on the other hand, was moving swiftly. She had put the house up for sale in a desperate bid to stave off foreclosure and secure some funds to start over. But Mark, blinded by his pride, refused to sign the papers. "This house is my legacy," he shouted one evening, slamming his fist on the dining table. "Your legacy?" Sarah shot back, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Your legacy is debt and lies, Mark. And now you want to drag me down with you? No, I'm done." As the sale of the house hung in limbo, Sarah's lawyer delivered more bad news. Mark had taken out additional loans without her knowledge. These weren't just tied to the house. They threatened her personal finances as well. That was the final straw. Sarah began building a case to ensure Mark would be solely responsible for the debt. She meticulously documented every lie, every withdrawal, every shady deal. If Mark wanted to play dirty, Sarah would meet him head-on. Meanwhile, the relationship between Mark and Lauren began to unravel. With the financial pressure mounting, Lauren started seeing Mark for who he really was, a desperate man clinging to his fading power. The facade of their partnership crumbled in a single, brutal confrontation. "You promised me a future," Lauren screamed, standing in the dimly lit parking lot where they'd often met in secret. "You said we'd build a life together, but all you've done is drag me into your mess." "I can fix this," Mark pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just give me time." "Time?" Lauren laughed bitterly. "You've had time, Mark, and now I'm done wasting mine." With that, she walked away, leaving Mark alone under the flickering streetlight. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of the hole he had dug. Not just for himself, but for everyone around him. Back at the house, Sarah was packing up the life she had built piece by piece. Each box was a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she had gained. Clarity, strength, and the determination to rebuild. Her sister, Emily, came over to help. "You're doing the right thing," Emily said as she folded Sarah's favorite sweater into a box. "Mark never deserved you," Sarah sighed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I just can't believe I let it get this far. I kept making excuses for him, thinking he'd change." Emily placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You believed in him. That's not a weakness, Sarah. It's who you are. But now, it's time to believe in yourself." As the foreclosure deadline loomed closer, Sarah made one last attempt to sell the house. She convinced Mark to meet with a potential buyer, hoping he'd finally see reason. The meeting started off well enough, but it quickly descended into chaos when Mark's temper flared. "This house is worth more than what you're offering," he yelled at the buyer, who was visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not letting it go for pennies on the dollar." The buyer, a calm and collected woman in her early 50s, turned to Sarah. "Is this how all your negotiations go?" "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice firm but apologetic. "My husband doesn't speak for me. If you'd like to continue this discussion privately, I'd be happy to." "Privately?" Mark cut her off, his face red with anger. "This is my house, Sarah. I have a say in what happens here." The buyer shook her head and stood up. "Thank you for your time, but I think I'll pass." As she walked out the door, Sarah turned to Mark, her composure slipping. "Do you see what you've done? You're sabotaging everything. Mark, if you won't help me save this house, at least stop making things worse." Mark didn't respond. He simply slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. The pivotal moment came late one night. Sarah was going through old financial records when she stumbled across a document she hadn't seen before. It was a loan agreement, one that bore her forged signature. Her heart raced as she realized the extent of Mark's deception. She confronted him the next morning, slamming the document down on the kitchen counter. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "You forged my signature on a loan?" Mark looked at the paper, his face pale. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain?" she interrupted. "There's nothing to explain, Mark. This is fraud. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I did it for us," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I thought if I could just get a little more time, a little more money, I could fix everything. For us." Sarah's laugh was cold and bitter. "Don't you dare pretend this was for us. This was for you, for your ego, for your lies." Mark reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare." The next day, Sarah filed for divorce. She also filed a report with the authorities regarding the forged loan documents. Mark had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to protect him anymore. But even as she took these steps, the pressure continued to mount. The foreclosure notice was still in effect, and with no buyer in sight, Sarah was running out of options. She worked tirelessly with her lawyer and financial advisor, hoping to find a way to save herself from the wreckage. Mark, on the other hand, began to unravel completely. His calls to Sarah became increasingly erratic, alternating between begging for forgiveness and hurling accusations. Lauren was gone, his finances were in shambles, and now even Sarah, his last lifeline, had turned her back on him. In a moment of desperation, Mark showed up at the house unannounced. Sarah was home alone, packing the last of her belongings. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, her voice weary. "I just want to talk," he said, his tone softer than she had expected. "Talk about what?" Sarah crossed her arms. "About how you lied to me. About how you forged my signature and ruined our lives." "I know I messed up," Mark admitted, his voice cracking. "But I'm trying, Sarah. I'm trying to make it right." "It's too late for that," she replied. "You had your chance, Mark. You had so many chances. But you threw them all away." Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I still love you." Sarah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't know what love is, Mark. If you did, you wouldn't have done any of this." As Mark left the house for the last time, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally in control of her own life. The climax of the story was fast approaching, and the stakes had never been higher. Would Sarah find a way to save herself and start anew? Or would Mark's actions drag her down with him? Stay tuned for the final chapter of this gripping tale, where all the secrets will be revealed and justice will finally be served. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. What do you think of Sarah's decision? Let us know in the comments below. Sarah's life had become a whirlwind of activity. Between packing her belongings, meetings with lawyers, and the emotional toll of untangling her life from Mark's chaos, every day felt like a battle. But as exhausting as it was, she was determined to see it through. She had come too far to let Mark's deceit dictate her future any longer. Meanwhile, Mark's spiral continued. The man who had once prided himself on control and confidence was now a shadow of his former self. His frequent calls and texts to Sarah had gone from desperate to angry, peppered with threats that only solidified her resolve. Late one evening, Sarah was reviewing her options with her attorney when a notification popped up on her phone. It was an email from Mark, but not the usual barrage of empty apologies or demands. This one contained an attachment. "What is it?" her lawyer, Lisa, asked, noticing Sarah's expression. "I don't know," Sarah said cautiously as she opened the file. Her eyes widened as she read through the document. It was an email thread between Mark and a shady broker he had been working with, discussing ways to funnel money from their joint accounts into offshore holdings. The thread was dated months before the forged loan documents, showing that Mark's betrayal had started long before she'd even suspected. Lisa leaned in, her tone serious. "This changes everything. We can use this to prove intent and premeditation. It strengthens your case for financial abuse and fraud." Sarah's hands shook as she closed her laptop. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined. But instead of despair, she felt a surge of determination. Mark's carelessness in sending her this email, whether out of arrogance or desperation, had handed her the ammunition she needed. The next day, Sarah called Mark and asked him to meet her at the house. She had no intention of reconciling, but she wanted to confront him on her terms, in her space. When Mark arrived, he looked disheveled and worn, a far cry from the polished man she had once known. He stepped into the living room, his eyes darting around as if searching for signs of Sarah's intentions. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, his tone defensive. Sarah sat at the dining table, a folder of documents in front of her. "Yes, Mark. I think it's time we were honest with each other." Mark scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. "Honest? That's rich coming from you." Ignoring his jab, Sarah slid the folder across the table. "You might want to take a look at this." Mark hesitated before opening the folder. His face turned ashen as he flipped through the pages. Copies of the email thread, bank statements, and a detailed timeline of his fraudulent activities. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," Sarah shot back, her voice steady and cold. "You lied to me, you forged my signature, and now I have proof that you've been planning this for months, maybe even years." Mark tried to regain his composure. "Sarah, listen to me. I was trying to protect us. To protect you." Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Protect me? You put me in debt. You destroyed our future. and you betrayed my trust. The only person you were protecting was yourself." Mark's mask of confidence finally slipped, and for a moment, Sarah saw the fear and regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough to make her waver. She stood up, meeting his gaze head-on. "I filed for divorce," she said firmly, "and my lawyer will be contacting you about the fraud charges. You can't talk your way out of this, Mark. It's over." Mark didn't take the confrontation well. Over the next few days, his behavior became erratic. He showed up at Sarah's workplace, causing a scene in the lobby. He called her family, attempting to turn them against her. But Sarah remained steadfast, refusing to let him intimidate her. One evening, as Sarah was packing the last of her things, she noticed a car parked outside the house. At first, she thought it was a neighbor or a delivery driver. But as the hours passed, the car remained. When she finally stepped outside to investigate, she saw Mark sitting in the driver's seat, staring at the house. "What are you doing here, Mark?" she called out, keeping her distance. He stepped out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate. "We need to talk." "We've already talked," Sarah said, her voice firm. "There's nothing left to say." Mark took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand. I can fix this. I can make everything right." "You can't fix this, Mark," Sarah said, her tone softening just slightly. "What you did, it's unforgivable. The only thing you can do now is accept the consequences." Mark's face twisted with anger. "You're just going to throw everything away? After everything I've done for us?" Sarah didn't flinch. "You didn't do this for us, Mark. You did it for you. And now you have to live with that." The next day, Sarah's lawyer filed a restraining order against Mark, citing his escalating behavior and the evidence of financial abuse. This, combined with the fraud charges, left Mark with no choice but to face the legal consequences of his actions. In the weeks that followed, Sarah finalized the sale of the house and moved into a small but cozy apartment across town. It wasn't the dream home she had envisioned, but it was hers, and it represented a fresh start. Mark, on the other hand, found himself at rock bottom. With no money, no support, and mounting legal troubles, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when lies and greed take precedence over love and trust. For the first time in years, Sarah felt free. She had taken control of her life, reclaimed her independence, and found strength she didn't know she had. And though the scars of Mark's betrayal would take time to heal, she knew she was on the path to something better. As she unpacked a box of books in her new living room, she found a journal she had kept during the early days of her marriage. Flipping through the pages, she smiled sadly at the hopes and dreams she had once written down. They were different now, but they weren't gone. She had the chance to create new dreams, ones that didn't rely on someone else to come true. Stay tuned for the final chapter, where we'll see how Sarah's journey concludes and the impact her decisions have on those around her. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of resilience and justice. What do you think of Sarah's confrontation with Mark? Let us know in the comments below. It's said that endings are just beginnings in disguise, and for Sarah, this couldn't have been truer. The aftermath of her final confrontation with Mark was turbulent, yes, but it also marked the beginning of a life she never imagined she could reclaim. Now, let's tie up all the loose ends and see where our characters landed. Mark didn't go quietly into the shadows. His arrogance had him clinging to the illusion of control, even as the walls around him crumbled. The fraud case was airtight, and with Sarah's lawyer, Lisa, presenting a timeline of damning evidence, including that ill-advised email, Mark's legal troubles escalated quickly. In court, Mark tried to play the victim, spinning a narrative of misunderstanding and misplaced intentions. But the judge wasn't buying it. Mark was ordered to pay restitution for the funds he had stolen from Sarah's accounts, though his empty bank balance made that unlikely. Worse for him, the fraud charges stuck, and he faced a reduced sentence thanks to a plea deal. Still, his fall from grace was complete. Mark's once glamorous life had disintegrated into a bleak reality, with no one left to turn to and no credibility to rebuild on. For Sarah, the victory was bittersweet. Winning the case meant financial security, but it also brought closure to the emotional chaos Mark had inflicted on her life. With the money recouped from the house sale and legal proceedings, she paid off the forged loan and began investing in herself for the first time in years. She moved into her new apartment, a cozy, light-filled space filled with second-hand treasures she had chosen herself. Slowly, she began to rebuild her sense of self. She signed up for a pottery class she'd always wanted to take, started running in the mornings, and joined a local book club. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming. Nathan, Sarah's son, was not forgotten in the chaos. Though the truth about his father's actions weighed heavily on him, he also found strength in his mother's determination to create a stable, happy home for them. The bond between Sarah and Nathan only deepened as they worked together to adjust to their new life. Nathan channeled his feelings into his art, painting vivid, emotional pieces that began gaining attention at local galleries. He told Sarah one evening, "I don't want Dad's mistakes to define me. I want to make something beautiful out of all this." And he did. His work became a testament to resilience, a reflection of how even the most painful experiences could be transformed into something meaningful. Over time, Sarah began to open herself up to the possibility of love again. It wasn't easy, after all, trust was something she would never take lightly again. But she met someone who didn't try to fix her or make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he simply stood by her, patiently letting her heal at her own pace. His name was Greg, a widower and teacher who shared her love of books and hiking. Their relationship grew slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and understanding. Mark, on the other hand, faded further into the background. Once a man who thrived on appearances and manipulation, he was now a cautionary tale among his former friends and colleagues. The people who once admired him distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the fallout of his choices. His pride, which had been his greatest asset and his deepest flaw, had ultimately led to his undoing. Sarah often reflected on the lessons she had learned through the ordeal. One evening, sitting on her balcony with a cup of tea, she pulled out the journal she had rediscovered during her move. Flipping to a blank page, she began to write, "I used to think betrayal was the end of the world, that someone breaking your trust meant you were broken, too. But now I know it's not the betrayal that defines you, it's what you do after. It's the strength you find when you think you have none, the hope you nurture even in the darkest moments. It's in choosing to rebuild, not for anyone else, but for yourself." She closed the journal and looked out at the city lights, a quiet smile on her face. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. As the camera pans out on Sarah's life, it's clear she has found not just closure but growth. Her journey wasn't without pain, but it left her stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future. Whether it was in Nathan's blossoming art career, her rekindled joy in life, or her cautious steps into a new relationship, Sarah's story had become one of hope and redemption. And isn't that what makes a story truly unforgettable? The idea that no matter how dark the chapter, the next page always holds the promise of light. If you found Sarah's story inspiring, let us know your thoughts in the comments. How would you have handled Mark's betrayal? And what do you think about Sarah's journey of resilience and self-discovery? Before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We've got more incredible stories coming your way. Stories of betrayal, revenge, and, most importantly, triumph. Hit that notification bell so you never miss out. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember, you are always stronger than you think.